was born in Brooklyn, New York on October 20th, 1944. My father was a government civil servant with the Air Force. My mother had worked during the war for military intelligence, but as a secretary. And she also was a waitress for part of the time that I was growing up as a child. I have one sister, Mary, and 6 brothers, Peter and Mark, Stephen and Paul, James and Joseph. I was the oldest, and so I didn't have to worry about getting along with my younger brothers, but we did. We loved each other. We spent a lot of time together. We were primarily, I guess I would say, an Irish-American family, even though I have a Konenkamp name, because my mother's parents were born in Ireland. My grandfather was born in County Carlow, and my grandmother was born in County Roscommon. And they came over in 1911. He was, Peter, my grandfather, was a shipbuilder. And he died when my mother was pregnant with me, so I never got to meet him. But my mother was first generation Irish then, and her mother was Irish, and we had lots of Irish traditions. And my father, who was a Konenkamp, of course, was half Irish. His mother was a Kennelly, and the granddaughter of an Irish immigrant. And his father was the grandson of a German immigrant originally from Hanover, Germany. But he died when my father was 3, so I never met either of my grandfathers, but both my Irish grandmothers had a huge influence in my life and were very loving grandparents. Oh yes, New York is a very ethnically diverse city, and so I grew up on Long Island, which was not in Brooklyn. I left Brooklyn. My parents, when my father got back from World War II, they bought a house on Long Island, out a place in a town called Westbury. And so that's where I grew up, and even that was very ethnic. My best friends were almost all Jewish. We lived but there was a strong Italian and Irish influence in Westbury as well. And so that's the kind of childhood I had. Of course, we were raised as strict Catholics, went to Catholic school. I was quiet, shy. My father, I think, expected more of me than I could possibly ever have achieved in his view. But I started working when I was very young. I was an altar boy when I was very young, and also a paper boy, and had a huge paper route. So, I had a happy childhood, but I was also very, very busy, industrious child. I was only a fair student. I was only a fair student. In fact, I can remember one of the nuns saying about my brother Peter, you should be a good student like Peter is. But I just was not interested I was really not interested in studying in grade school. And that was a great disappointment to the nuns. I did what I had to do to get by, but I was a dreamer, I guess. I attended St. Bridget's grade school in Westbury, and I attended Carl Place High School through my freshman year. But then my father and mother received devastating news. They were closing the air base, which was where my father worked. And he could either retire and look for another job, or he could accept a transfer to Warner Robins Air Force Base in Georgia. And so my parents made what was for them a devastating and tearful decision to move to Macon, Georgia. We moved there in 1961. In many ways, that was probably one of the greatest events in my life, and for so many reasons. It was devastating for them because they were leaving everything they knew, their parents, all their cousins and relatives and friends. They were dyed-in-the-wool Brooklynites. But my sister and I, who were old enough to appreciate what was really happening, were just elated we were going to leave New York, because the high school, I went to a public high school, it was no place to do any learning. It was violent and destructive. I have a vivid memory still as a freshman of our homeroom teacher having a fist fight with one of the freshmen in the class. And thank God the teacher won, because if the kid had won, God knows what homeroom would have been like after that. So when we got to leave, it was a wonderful event. But culturally, it was shocking too for us, how much that influenced me when I came into the Jim Crow South. Well, like I say, we lived in a culturally diverse area in New York and had lots of friends of different backgrounds. When we got to Macon, Georgia, everything was segregated. Brown versus Board of Education had been decided in 1954, and 7 years later, when we got to Macon, absolutely nothing had changed at all. I have a vivid memory of going into a department store and seeing 4 water fountains, and 2 water fountains said over the book, whites only, and they were kind of the modern aluminum air-cooled ones, and then there were 2 spigots, one for children, one for adults, not water fountain, but just a spigot with a little, like a little sink on it. It says colored only. And that pretty much described how the city was divided. And so I guess that's the first time I ever encountered institutionalized injustice, legal injustice. And it was everywhere. I don't want to give the wrong impression about people in Macon, though, because there is such a thing as Southern hospitality, and the people that we encountered, black and white, were wonderful people. My life has been enriched tremendously by the people I've met there. There's one event that I think I'd like to share that it has kind of influenced my life. There's on the Bibb County buses, all the buses were segregated too, of course. And if you get on the bus, which I did every day to get to school, my sister and I would go to school together. And you pay when you get on the front of the bus, and then you walk into the bus. So you can sit anywhere you want if you're white. But in the middle of the bus, there's this big yellow line, and it says color seating to the rear. And it must have been around 61 or 62 that Martin Luther King had been in southern Georgia. He had never come to Macon to organize any protest, but he had been in southern Georgia, and he inspired a lot of other people. And one day, I wasn't there for this, but 4 pastors, black pastors, got on and sat on the front of the bus. And so the driver pulled over and called the police, and they were arrested and taken to jail because it was against the law for a black person to sit in the front of a bus. And several days later, there was another demonstration where some young men also got on and were arrested as well. Well, one day I was on a bus, and we were coming home from school. And if you got on in order to get on the bus, you had to get on the front and pay. White people could then leave the bus either by going out the front door or the back door. Black people had to go out the back door. They could not leave from the front door. So there was this little boy. He was younger than I was, and I was, 15 or 16. So I'd say he was about 12. Got on the bus and sat down, and when it was time to get off, at his stop, he walked to the front of the bus and tried to get off. And he was behind some other people getting off. And he was the last one to get off, to try to get off. And just as he was about to step off the bus, the driver grabbed his arm and held him. And closed the door, and off the bus went again. And I watched this boy, and tears were just streaming down his face. And I was shaken, and anyway, stop after stop, the same thing. He would not relent. He would not go back and get off at the back of the bus, even though the driver told him to get off at the back. Well, anyway, my stop came, and I got off at the back of the bus. And then I stood there for the longest time. And you know, you get this kind of clarity sometimes only after something happens. And just a sense of overwhelming shame came over me. And I thought, why couldn't I have done something? Why didn't I go up there and put my arm around him or try to pull the bus driver's arm away from him? Why did I not help him? Because what was happening to him was against everything I believed. And everything all the values that I was raised with were for equality and respect for fellow human beings. And I had done nothing, and I felt ashamed. You know, years later, I was on a national advisory board for a foster care organization, and the CEO of that organization was a black woman, Ruth Masinga. And I was having dinner with her in Seattle one night, and I had never talked about this event because I was basically ashamed of it. And I decided to share this with her, and she had grown up in Mississippi in the Jim Crow South. And she gave me a perspective that I had never thought of. She said, you know, that wasn't your moment, that was his moment. And if you had intervened, you would have stolen his moment. And I thought, well, that's right, isn't it? And when is my moment? And I think of that boy all the time. And my moment is every time I put the robe on. So that little boy, that 12-year-old, has had an influence on me all my life. His courage. You know, I reflected on that because I knew you were going to do this interview and tried to think about who my mentors were. And I have to say, with almost maybe a couple of exceptions, all my mentors have been women. And the teacher that had the most influence on me in high school was Sister Aurelia. Aurelia means golden. You know, it's from the Latin, and she was named after a martyr, a Roman martyr. But she was really golden. She was, I never heard her say a cross word. I never heard her say anything discouraging. Even if I had done poorly on something, she was always encouraging and loving. I think of her often too, and I think of her as kind of the ideal teacher. She was just the most loving, lovely woman. She was the daughter of Italian immigrants, and I got to see her many years later before she died. I went back down to see her and thank her again for what a wonderful teacher she was. Another professor, Mrs. Price, who was a Spanish teacher, really was another mentor for me, and very, very, very patient and kind. And I really began to enjoy languages, and regretted that she taught French too, but she taught it alternatively, so I didn't get in the right cycle to get the French side. I got the Spanish side, and that encouraged me to study Italian years later. And I've been to Rome and studied in Rome Italian, and so you know, she was another one who loved culture and loved language, and who fired my mind. Starting with my sister Mary, she's retired now and living in Tampa, and she worked for the Veterans Administration for a pathologist. And my brother Peter is the information director, media director at the University of Georgia. My brother, let's see who's next, Mark, is an engineer, graduated from Georgia Tech, works for Hyundai. My brother Steve is a senior partner with Ernst & Young in Atlanta, but he travels all over the world. They have offices in Beijing and London, Paris. My brother, let's see which one is next, I have to always, Paul works for Cisco Systems, and Jim is a delivery, does deliveries. And my brother Joe is a fire protection he's an engineer. He specializes in installing fire protection systems for computer systems, things of that nature. My mother was a Francophile, and so she spent much of the time when we were kids speaking to us in French, and so, you know, we called Dad mon père. And my father was a very, very brilliant man. He and his brother took a civil service exam in New York City, and they scored 1 and 2 of all the testers. He was excellent in math, an area that I've never been good in, and so I could not understand why math didn't catch on. He never finished college. He went to college for a couple of years, and then decided he needed to stay home, and because he was going to night school, he just needed to stay home and help me with my homework, which was pretty fruitless. It didn't really catch fire until I got to college and decided that I really liked learning. There were certain things in high school that I liked, but you know, I was not an all-around great student, average student. I played football, wasn't very good, but I got a chance to play football in high school, and that was a big thing. Got me in shape. But they were very, very insistent that all of us get an education and all of us go to college, and I think every one of us, not all of us have graduated from college, but every one of us had the opportunity to go. They financed it and paid the tuition, and gave us the opportunity to go. My mother was very insistent that I was going to go, and so I did. It wasn't a choice. I might have decided to try something else, but she insisted, and so I went to University of Georgia, and attended that there. Graduated in 4 years. There's no way I was going to go out of state to some private school because it just wasn't the kind of money for that, and I did not have the grades to get a scholarship. So, and it was a good fit for me. I loved University of Georgia. It's a beautiful campus. Many of the professors were absolutely wonderful. I majored in history, which was an enjoyable and not too challenging, but a very enjoyable major. No, I got drafted into the military, to the Army, but I had been going to the naval recruiter, and I wanted to go to sea. I had never been to sea, and I decided that I'd like to join the Navy after I got out of college. I thought I might have a chance to be an officer, or maybe not. I don't know, but I was going to join the Navy. I knew I had to serve. Because at that time there was no draft lottery. There just simply was the draft. You got a draft notice and you go. And the day I graduated, the draft was in the mail when I got back. There was greetings. So I went down to the Navy recruiter and I said, well, I guess it's time for me to sign up. So this is what I'd like to do. And so I joined the Navy right after college. Well, the Navy, I was a radarman. We spent many months at a time at sea, and I was never sent to Vietnam. I thought I might be sent to Vietnam, but I wasn't. I spent all of my career in the Mediterranean, the Atlantic, and the Caribbean. But the best thing that ever happened to me in the Navy was I met my wife to be there. She was a Navy nurse, and we met on a blind date. And her father taught at the USD Medical School as a professor of anatomy. And that's what brought me back here to South Dakota. And when I finally got out of the Navy, she was with child, and we wanted to have a place near family, and we chose Vermilion. Oh yes, there were many times that you'd hear people shout at us, things like warmonger, and it's a strange thing, when you get drafted into the military, I didn't really have a choice. I was going to be in a uniform, and maybe if it wasn't the Navy, it was going to be the Army. That my fellow citizens looked upon me with disgust and disdain, especially the young people. I didn't do that well in law school. I was an average student in law school too, and not that I didn't try hard. I did work hard. When I was second year student, my oldest son Andrew was diagnosed with leukemia. So my wife and I spent the last year of law school trying to save his life, and he had multiple radiations and chemotherapy, and he died 6 months after I graduated. So the law school for me wasn't the same as many of my classmates, and I've had some of them say, you know, you weren't around for the parties that much, you know, and I said, well, I had other things that kept us busy. I didn't tell anyone in law school, except the dean, that my son was dying. The doctor said he would have 17 months to live. And so I didn't want to get any special treatment. I just wanted to be able to get through and graduate. And I had considered quitting law school to get a job to help pay for. We had some medical insurance, but the bills were horrendous. But Geri's father and mother said that they would help us. So she was teaching at the nursing school at USD, and she quit that. And she stayed home full-time with Andy, and I finished law school. So when there was a job opportunity, I saw somebody posted a job opportunity for an internship in Rapid City, and so I applied for that. I didn't want to be that far away, but my wife and I thought, well, this is an opportunity. Maybe I'll get a chance to have a job afterwards, and I did. So I went. It was an internship with the state's attorney, and I was there during the summer and loved the work. They put me mostly into doing juvenile court work, which I absolutely adored. It was fascinating work, working with children. And in fact, once we got to Rapid City, and after our son had passed away and we had a daughter, my wife and I decided we wanted to be foster parents, so we were foster parents for several years too. Yes, I could have gone other places. I got a very high LSAT score. So, so yes, I could have gone, I think, to many other law schools in other states, but there was Geri's family, my wife's family, and when she's pregnant and going to have a baby, you want family nearby. My family had since then moved to Atlanta. There wasn't any law school in Atlanta that I wanted to attend, or maybe could have. I just didn't want to go to Atlanta, and so it was absolutely a no-brainer to go to Vermont. The University of South Dakota is a pretty nice place to go to school, and how wonderful the people were, and so welcoming. And South Dakotans are, in many ways, they're small-town folks, and there's a sense of community, a sense of sharing troubles and responsibilities. Things you don't see in New York. If you're on the subway, no one looks at anybody. It's like that. I never felt unwelcome. I never felt like I didn't belong. There were kids from other states that had been there too, that went to law school there too, but most of them were South Dakotans. In Vermilion, there was not much of a Native American presence, and so I really didn't get a chance to get a sense of Native American life until I moved West River, because it's much more predominant there. And it was there that I met many Native American people in all sorts of ways. Some of them not good, and some of them good. So it was then that I began to see the comparison between the way the blacks were treated in the South and the way Native Americans are treated in South Dakota and other places in the North. Not the same. I would say there were comparisons, but they weren't the same. There's no apartheid in the sense that there was in the South, but there was, an attitude, not spoken about, but an attitude about Native Americans that was disturbing. I was hired as an intern by Jack Klauck, who was the state's attorney in Rapid City. Absolutely great guy, a devout Catholic, one of the nicest men I've ever worked for. Had a wonderful family. One son became a priest. Two of his sons went on to go through the West Point Military Academy, has a daughter who's become an emergency room surgery nurse. So just a great family and a great person, a great mentor to have. And the great thing about him, from my point of view, was that he just handed you the file and says, go try the case. So I got to try murder cases, burglary cases, the toughest cases you can imagine, the biggest cases you can imagine. Here I am out of law school, only 1 or 2 years, and I'm trying major cases. So I got a huge amount of experience. And then I got an offer after about 3.5 years working at the State's Attorney's Office to work for Frank Wallahan. Frank Wallahan was one of the most colorful trial lawyers in South Dakota history. Kind of a tempestuous man, and in the courtroom he was absolutely relentless. He tried anything and everything, and he was the same way. Here's the file, go try the case. You know, and sometimes I'd say, you know, I've never tried this kind of a case, Frank. Do you want to at least sit in with me? Well, that was good and bad, because, you know, if he sat in with you, he wanted to try it his way, and that wasn't my way. His way was confrontational, and my way was to try to quietly get to the heart of the matter. So, but anyway, he was a tremendous teacher too. Frank, had been the president of the Trial Lawyers Association. He had been in the state legislature. He was a very outspoken Democrat. He was loud. He lived his life out loud. And he was a wonderful trial lawyer, a brilliant trial lawyer. He could stand up and come up with ideas that you wouldn't think of in a million years, just how to approach a witness, and got people to say and admit things that you would never imagine in a million years they would admit. So a wonderful trial lawyer. So I received an offer from a friend of mine who had been in the state's attorney's office, Brian Haig, and he and an older lawyer, Charlie Whiting, had formed a partnership, and Brian invited me to join that law firm, and I was there for 4 years. Exactly. Did insurance defense work, plaintiff's work. You know, we didn't specialize. Brian probably specialized more than I did, but I did everything that came in the door. You know, I've been a lifelong basketball player, and in the evenings we'd go play basketball with police officers, probation officers, sheriffs, lawyers, and somebody said, you know, Judge Parker is retiring. Why don't you? I didn't know this. I hadn't heard that. He said, you should apply for his job. And I thought, oh, that's an interesting thought. I wonder, you know. And I talked to my wife, and she said, well, I always knew you were going to be a judge, and you'll get this appointment, she said. And she had said that. And so I did apply. There were 10 people who applied. And at the time, Bill Janklow was the governor. And some very fine people on that list, people I respected and people I thought were just going to be a shoo-in. And so I got a call one day from a local politician, and he was asking me questions about my background and what my connection was with the Republican Party. And I had registered originally as an independent, but Jack Clark, who was a Republican state's attorney, said, you know, I'd appreciate it if you'd register Republican if you're going to work in my office, because I've had pressure. He wasn't political, but he said, I've had pressure that I should be hiring Republicans. And so I said, okay, I don't care, I'll register Republican. So anyway, this Republican politician called me and asked me questions, and finally he said, you know, you probably would be a good judge, but you're never going to be a judge. You know, you just don't have the connections. And I said, "Oh, thank." And I thought that was I thought he was speaking for Governor Janklow. And I thought, well, that's that. I guess I'm not going to be a judge. And then one day I get a call, and it's Bill Janklow on the phone. And he said, I need to see you up here in my office right away, tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock. You know, so anyway, drove early and got up and I went in the waiting room. And he comes out and he says, you know, you're going to be a judge an awful long time. I was 39 years old. You're going to be a judge for an awful long time. And I said, you know, are you going to interview me? And he says, no, I've already made up my mind. He says, I've checked up on you. I've called a ton of people and talked about you. And I've talked to lawyers. I've talked to a lot of people, and you're the one I want. He says, and I think he liked the fact that I'd been in the military. I think he knew that I had a child who died of leukemia. I think he says, you've had some really difficult things in your life and challenges, and he says, that's what I want. He says, the previous governor was a milkman. He didn't know anything about good judges. He didn't know who would make a good judge. He says, I don't have any excuse. I'm a lawyer. I have to know who to pick. And he said, I pick you. I never got an interview. He never asked me a question. He talked the whole time. He said, I'd never met you before, but I had met him. In law school, he had forgotten. But I had met him. He did something at the law school, and I went up and introduced myself. But I had never made a political contribution to the Republican Party. I'd never made a contribution to his campaign. The only campaigns I ever contributed to were to a sheriff who was a friend of mine, and 2 county commissioners that went to our church, a Democrat and a Republican. So I was out of politics completely, and I had thought, because this politician had called me, that I had been vetted, and in reality he was just, I don't know what he was doing. So anyway, that's how I became a judge.